You are a distraction. Get out of here.
I have the papers. I am the new owner.
By the time Clara realized Gabriel was talking about her, the whole market had already gone quiet. It happened in the open aisle between the fish stalls and the spice tables, under a string of faded yellow flags put up for Founders Week. Someone had handed Gabriel a microphone because the mayor was late and the investors were early, and he had become, in the last year, the kind of man people pushed toward a spotlight. He stood on a crate near the weighing station, in a white button-down that still looked too expensive for the damp air of San Isidro Market. He had one hand in his pocket, the other around the microphone, smiling the careful smile he used when he wanted to look like he belonged in rooms with polished floors instead of cracked concrete. Clara was 5 yards away, holding the ledger he had asked her to bring. An older woman from the poultry section laughed too loudly and called out, "Before you become a big man, Gabriel, at least tell us when you're marrying our Clara." The laughter that followed was warm at first, familiar, teasing. The kind of laughter the market lived on. Gabriel looked at Clara, just for a second, long enough for her to see he was afraid. Then one of the investors beside him, a man in a navy blazer who smelled of cologne and impatience, said, "This is a fruit girl, right? I heard there was some emotional distraction." A few people chuckled. Somebody shushed them. Clara felt the ledger slip against her palms. Gabriel could have laughed it off. He could have said her name gently. He could have said, "Mind your business." He could have chosen one honest thing. Instead, he said clear enough for everyone to hear, "There's no misunderstanding. Clara is just one of the market girls. She works here. That's all." The birds in the cages behind the poultry stall screeched. Nobody moved. Maybe if he had stopped there, the wound would have been smaller. But shame made him cruel in a hurry. "I'm trying to build something serious," he added, voice tightening. "I can't let gossip tie me to a life I've worked hard to outgrow." There were gasps, then the soft kind, like people getting cold all at once. Clara did not remember setting the ledger down. Later someone would tell her she had done it carefully, almost politely, on a sack of onions. But what she remembered was the sound of blood in her ears and the sudden, unbearable awareness of everyone pretending not to look at her while looking at nothing else. Gabriel had once kissed inside of her wrist in the storage room behind stall 14 because she told him she was always cold there. He had once sat beside her on the loading dock at 4 a.m. sharing coffee, so sweet it made her teeth ache. He had once said very quietly, "When I finally get out of this place, I'm taking you with me." Now he was looking over her head, not at her, as if she were already something he'd left behind. Clara nodded once, though she was not agreeing to anything. "All right," she said. That was the only word she gave him in front of everyone. Then she turned and walked the full length of the aisle with a steadiness she did not feel, past the women who had watched her grow up, past the rice sacks, past the old clock that had not worked in years, past the flower bucket she had filled before dawn. Nobody stopped her. Maybe they knew better. Maybe they were embarrassed for her. Maybe people only become brave in groups when cruelty is easier than kindness. At the gate, she heard Gabriel say her name. Not loudly. Not enough. She kept walking. Rain had started by the time she reached the road, thin and mean and slanting sideways. Clara didn't cry there. She made it all the way home first, to the narrow room behind her mother's shuttered sorry store, where the roof leaked over the sink and the paint curled in the corners, and only then did she sit on the floor, still in her wet slippers, and put her fist in her mouth so the neighbors wouldn't hear. The cruelest part was not that he had rejected her. It was that he had used her as proof that he had become better than where they both came from. Clara had known Gabriel Santos since she was 16, and he was 19, and still carrying fish crates for his father with shoulders too narrow for the weight. He had been beautiful in an unfinished way then. Quick smile, restless hands, a temper that flashed and vanished before most people could name it. Boys at the market boasted, swaggered, wasted hours. Gabriel worked. He worked when his father got sick and the debts came. He worked when his younger brother ran off to see Boo. He worked when his mother's knees began failing, and she could no longer stand all day over melting ice and silver scales. He worked through typhoons, chest colds, power outages, price hikes, grief. Clara had loved that about him before she understood she loved him at all. He was never gentle in the simple, easy ways. He forgot birthdays. He answered questions too fast when he was tired. When he felt cornered, he said the sharpest thing in the room and hated himself only after it landed. But he learned numbers at night by watching free accounting lessons on his phone. He kept folded lists in his pocket. He remembered what each regular customer owed and never shamed the ones who paid late. He could tell whether fish had been frozen and thawed by pressing a thumb just under the gill. He carried ambition like a fever. Clara admired it, even when it frightened her. She had ambition too, though hers looked different. She had inherited her mother's flower stall and expanded into fruits, herbs, and homemade vinegar, because flowers alone did not keep lights on. She knew which vendors lied about losses and which ones lied about being fine. She kept 3 kinds of records: the official one, the useful one, and the one in her head. Old Mr. Jacinto, who owned the market, had noticed that 2 years earlier when she corrected his clerk's rental figures without embarrassing the clerk. After that, he started calling her to the office to help sort through papers nobody else wanted to touch. Brains shouldn't go to waste just because they wear slippers, he had muttered once, pretending not to be kind. Clara never told Gabriel how often she worked upstairs with Mr. Jacinto, not because it was a secret, exactly, more because Gabriel was always in a hurry, always moving toward the next version of his life, and she got tired hearing him talk about the market as if it were a swamp and not the ground that had fed them, that had been their quiet fracture for months. He wanted out. She wanted better. Those are not the same dream, though they can look similar from a distance. 3 nights before Founders Week, they had argued in the storage room behind the dry goods section. Gabriel had been pacing, phone in hand, saying, "You don't understand how this works. If I get Del Rosario Holdings to back the renovation, everything changes." "For who?" Clara had asked. "For everyone." "That's not true. It is if they modernize the place." "Modernize," she repeated, almost laughing. "That's a pretty word for pushing vendors out." He dragged a hand through his hair. "Why do you always act like wanting more is betrayal? Why do you always talk like leaving is the only kind of success?" He stared at her then, breathing hard. There had been a long, dangerous silence. Finally he said softer, "Come with me when this happens." "To where?" "To wherever comes next." "That's not an answer. You want a map? I'm trying to build one." She had looked at him for a long time after that. "Gabriel, you keep asking me to trust a future you won't describe." He kissed her anyway, as if his mouth could solve what his honesty would not. Now, on the night after the humiliation, Clara sat at her little table under the weak yellow bulb and spread out the documents Mr. Jacinto had given her over the past 6 months. Lease histories, survey maps, share transfer drafts, loan proposals from 3 banks, an unsigned purchase agreement, notes written in Mr. Jacinto's crabbed handwriting. The old man had called her in one afternoon, while coughing so hard she'd nearly gone to fetch water. He had tapped the file and said, "My son wants to sell to developers. The board want a miracle. The vendors want lower rent and better drainage, and a roof that doesn't leak on their tomatoes. I am too old for all of them." Clara had asked, "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you read before you react." She had smiled a little. "And that makes me dangerous?" "It makes you useful." Mr. Jacinto had not wanted the market turned into a parking structure and air-conditioned grocery chain. But he was losing money, and sentiment did not pay electricians. So he had begun forming a cooperative model in secret with a handful of longtime tenants. Clara, who understood the books and knew which stalls mattered more than the empty promises of rich men, became the one person he trusted to help finish the plan. Weeks earlier, a legal settlement from her mother's old land dispute had finally come through. Modest by city standards, life-changing by hers. Clara had not told anyone except Mr. Jacinto, not even Gabriel, especially not Gabriel. She wanted just once to build something before people could say she had only gotten lucky. Now the papers trembled under her fingers. At the top of one draft agreement was her name, not as helper, not as vendor, as principal buyer. She stared at it until the words blurred. Her chest hurt. Her pride hurt worse. For one wild minute, she wanted to burn every paper on the table. Let the developers have the market. Let Gabriel discover too late that he had insulted the one person trying to save the place he came from. Let the town lose something valuable and call it progress. Let ruin teach what love had failed to teach. Instead, she folded the documents back into their envelope. Pain had its own appetite. If she fed it, it would ask for the rest of her life. The next morning, her stall stayed closed. By noon, the story had traveled farther than the fish deliveries. By evening, women Clara barely knew were saying Gabriel had thrown her away to impress rich people. Men who had done worse were calling him shameless, which irritated Clara more than if they had said nothing. Public outrage was often just entertainment with moral language. Gabriel came to her house twice that day. The first time, she heard him through the thin door asking her aunt if Clara was inside. "She doesn't want to see you," her aunt said. "I just need 5 minutes." "You had your minutes yesterday." The second time, near dark, Clara stood in silence while he remained outside. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," he said through the wood. She almost laughed, like that, as if the arrangement of the knives mattered more than the stabbing. When she didn't answer, he stayed a little longer. Then he said, so quietly she nearly missed it, "I was scared." Clara finally spoke. "Then you should have looked frightened, Gabriel, not proud." His shadow shifted under the gap in the door. She imagined him rubbing the back of his neck, jaw tight, already losing patience with the conversation he deserved. "I know I was wrong." "No," she said. "You know you were seen." Silence. Then his footsteps went away. 2 days later, Mr. Jacinto suffered a stroke in his office. He lived through the night, but not the next morning. The market changed its sound after that. Grief as acoustics. Even the bargaining softened. Vendors lowered their radios. People walked more carefully up the office stairs. Clerks whispered over paperwork they didn't understand. Clara wore a plain black blouse to the wake and stood in the back with the flower vendors, while Gabriel stood near the family, uncomfortable in borrowed grief. He saw her once across the room. She looked thinner already, not glamorous, not transformed, not the triumphant woman from a revenge fantasy, just tired, self-contained, and unreachable. After the prayers, Mr. Jacinto's lawyer asked her to stay. By evening, the board had the documents. By dawn, the rumor had started. By noon, it was true. And if you've ever watched someone lose the person who believed in them because they confused love with convenience and dignity with status, then you already know the rest of the week was not kind to Gabriel Santos. Clara came back to San Isidro Market on Friday morning. Not in silk, not in sunglasses, not with bodyguards or red lipstick or the slow-motion cruelty people imagine when they want humiliation returned with interest. She came in the same low-heeled sandals she wore on inventory days, carrying a letter folder, and followed by Mr. Jacinto's lawyer, a woman from the bank, and 2 members of the newly formed vendor cooperative. But she walked differently, not because she was richer, because she no longer needed permission. The market saw her before Gabriel did. Heads turned in ripples. Conversations thinned. Even the men unloading bananas paused. Gabriel was at his stall, arguing with the supplier over delayed ice delivery, when his mother touched his arm. "Look." He turned. For a moment, he genuinely did not understand what he was seeing. Clara stopped beneath the office balcony. The lawyer unrolled a notice and pinned it to the public board beside the delinquent rent list and the faded health inspection certificate. Her voice, when she spoke, did not shake. "Effective today, management of San Isidro Market transfers to San Isidro Cooperative Holdings under the purchase agreement finalized by the late Roberto Jacinto and approved by the board. Existing vendor leases will be honored. Pending demolition talks are suspended. Rent increases are frozen for 6 months, while repairs are assessed." It took the crowd a few seconds. Then the murmuring broke loose. "Cooperative? Suspended? Who signed? Wait, what does that mean?" One of the older vendors squinted and asked the question everyone else wanted answered. "Who owns it?" Clara lifted her chin. "I do, with the cooperative." The silence after that felt almost theatrical, except nobody had rehearsed it. Gabriel stared at her as if language had deserted him. He knew every set of shoulders in that market, every stall, every crooked tile and rusted drain pipe, every smell that changed by the hour. But he had never once looked at Clara and imagined ownership sitting inside her. Not because it wasn't there. Because some failures of imagination are really failures of respect. She met his eyes only once. There was no victory in her face. That somehow hurt him more. What followed was not magical. Markets do not become fairy tales because power changes hands. Within hours, 3 vendors were fighting over stall boundaries. The electrician wanted payment up front for long-delayed repairs, and Del Rosario Holdings sent a letter threatening legal action over the redevelopment memorandum Gabriel had helped negotiate. By afternoon, Clara was upstairs in the office with ink on her fingers, reading contracts while people lined up outside her door. Her aunt brought coffee. The lawyer brought bad news. The cooperative members brought worse opinions. Everyone wanted something. Everyone believed urgency made them right. Gabriel went up after sunset, when the last customers had gone and the concrete still held the day's heat. The office door was open. Clara sat bent over a stack of files, glasses low on her nose, hair falling loose from its clip. For a second the sight was so familiar that his body remembered easier days before his mind did. Then she looked up, and the distance came back. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He nodded once. "Probably." She waited. He stepped inside. "Anyway, why didn't you tell me?" It was the wrong first question. He knew that as soon as it left him. Clara leaned back slowly. "About the purchase?" "About any of it." A tired smile touched her mouth and vanished. "You were busy outgrowing us." He flinched. "That's not fair." "No." She removed her glasses. "Gabriel, you stood in the middle of this market and made me small so strangers would think you were big. I don't owe your confusion anything." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long time. "I know. Is that all?" "It's more than you gave me in public." The words landed cleanly. He glanced at the contracts on her desk. "Del Rosario will come after you." "I know. You don't have the capital for a long legal fight." "Probably not." "You say that like it doesn't scare you." "It terrifies me." The honesty of it surprised them both. Gabriel took a breath. "Then let me help." Her expression hardened at once. "No, I know the suppliers. I know what Jacinto promised and what he delayed. I can fix half the stalls that break before noon and the other half before evening." I said no. "Because you hate me?" A flash of pain crossed her face. "Because I don't trust what you become when your fear is stronger than your love." That shut him up. He stood there a second longer, then gave one stiff nod and left. He should have gone home. Instead, he sat alone at his dark stall while meltwater dripped into drains, and remembered being 12 years old in school while 2 boys pinched their noses and asked if his family slept on beds of dead fish. He remembered his father coming to Parents' Day in rubber boots, seeing the embarrassment on Gabriel's face, and saying nothing about it on the walk home. He remembered the silence more than the shame. His father had died 3 years later in a storm that capsized 2 boats near the coast. Gabriel's last clear memory of him was not his voice, but the roughness of his palm between Gabriel's shoulders, steadying him as he learned to gut Bangus without tearing the flesh. He had spent half his life trying not to be pitted. The tragedy was that, somewhere along the way, he had begun mistaking tenderness for pity too. The market crisis came on Sunday. A refrigeration unit failed in the meat section just before dawn, and by 6 a.m. vendors were shouting that thousands of pesos worth of goods would spoil. The repairman refused to come without advance payment. The temporary generator coughed twice and died. Clara was on site in 15 minutes, hair wet from a rush bath, face pale from too little sleep. She checked breaker boxes, called electricians, argued with the repair shop, and nearly burst into tears when the bank delayed a transfer because a signature on one cooperative form didn't match the registration card. Gabriel saw her slam the phone down and press her thumb hard against her eye. No one else seemed to notice. He crossed the aisle before he could talk himself out of it. "The backup switch is corroded," he said. She looked up, exhausted enough not to hide it. "I know. You'll lose the whole section if you wait for the repairman." "I know. I can patch it for a few hours." She hesitated. It was the first hesitation she had given him since Friday, and because he had been the one begging for openings, he recognized how fragile it was. "I'm not asking for trust," he said quietly. "Just a wrench." 20 minutes later, Gabriel was under the panel with 2 electricians and a flashlight between his teeth, rewiring a temporary bypass while Clara coordinated ice deliveries from neighboring stalls and talked 3 panicking vendors out of hauling everything home. Sweat ran down Gabriel's spine. Someone shouted for pliers. Someone else swore the smell of spoiled chicken would kill them all. Clara moved through it with clipped efficiency, making mistakes because everyone makes mistakes when time is short and money is burning. She sent the wrong boy for extension cords. She signed one receipt twice and another not at all. She snapped at an elderly butcher and apologized 30 seconds later. None of it made her smaller. When the refrigeration kicked back on, the applause that broke out was messy and relieved and a little ridiculous. One of the vendors laughed so hard he had to lean on a post. Clara closed her eyes for a second, the briefest surrender to relief. Then she opened them and found Gabriel looking at her. "Thank you," she said. He wiped grease across his forehead by accident. "You're welcome." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was not nothing. Over the next weeks, they worked in the same orbit without pretending ease. Clara paid him for formal consulting when he refused free involvement. He insisted on receipts. She insisted on boundaries. When arguments came, and they came often, they were about electrical loads, stall reassignments, supplier terms, and drainage priorities instead of old kisses. In some ways, that made them easier. In other ways, it made them much harder, because competence can be more intimate than memory. Del Rosario Holdings did not let go. Their representative, Adrian Del Rosario, was smooth, educated, and not nearly as villainous as the market wanted him to be. He believed sincerely that replacing most of San Isidro with a retail complex and structured parking would bring jobs and tax revenue. He spoke in figures that were not invented. He also spoke as if old women selling garlic by the gram were sentimental obstacles to efficiency. At a municipal hearing set for the following month, the cooperative would have to prove the market's social and economic value, as well as its ability to survive without corporate takeover. Adrian had feasibility studies, traffic projections, and legal leverage. Clara had unpaid vendors, fragile books, and a handful of people held together by habit, hunger, and stubbornness. On the night before the hearing, Gabriel found her alone on the office balcony, staring down at the empty aisles. The market at night looked stripped of personality. No laughter, no radios, no haggling. Just rows of sleeping stalls under dim bulbs and the smell of old rain. "You should sleep," he said. She gave a tired huff that might have been a laugh. What a revolutionary idea. He stepped beside her, keeping distance. "Adrian thinks I'll support the redevelopment tomorrow. Will you?" The question was quiet, almost gentle. That made it harder. Gabriel looked down at his hands. "A month ago, I would have." Clara said nothing. He swallowed. "I used to think if I could get far enough from this place, no one could make me feel small again. And now..." He took longer to answer than she expected. "Now I think I've spent years trying to outrun the shame of being poor," he said. "And all it did was teach me to shame other people first." The night held that between them. Clara folded her arms. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because tomorrow I'll have to decide what kind of man says things under pressure, and what kind keeps living by them." She turned to look at him then, properly. Moonlight made her face seem softer than it was. "You think one honest day fixes what happened?" "No," he let out a breath. "I think it's the first day I stopped making it worse." At the hearing, the municipal hall was so crowded people stood in the aisles and leaned through the windows. Vendors came in best clothes and worn sandals. Del Rosario's team came with binders, polished shoes, and a projector that failed twice before working. Clara wore a cream blouse she had ironed herself and carried a file thick enough to make her wrists ache. When her turn came, she did not speak like a heroine. Her voice trembled once at the start. She misplaced one paper and had to pause to find it. She almost skipped a page in the cooperative proposal, but she knew the market in a way no consultant ever could. She named the number of families directly dependent on its daily operations. She showed records of credit extended informally to flood victims. She outlined drainage upgrades, phase rent stabilization, waste management reform, and a child care corner funded through shared vendor contributions and local grants. Then Adrian rose and smiled the professional smile of a man about to sound reasonable. He praised her courage, praised the market's history, praised community spirit. Then he asked whether sentiment could outweigh the long-term gains of a cleaner, safer, more modern commercial complex. He asked how a cooperative with limited capital will withstand future shocks. He asked whether the public should trust a first-time owner whose business experience came from informal sector management. Some of the room bristled. Clara answered the first two well. The third made something flicker across her face. Not panic, exactly, but the fatigue of being measured by standards people like her are never invited to define. Then Adrian called Gabriel Santos. A murmur moved through the hall. Gabriel walked to the front, feeling every eye that had watched him humiliate Clara weeks earlier. He had not prepared remarks because preparation had become one more way he hid. The council chair asked whether, in a professional judgment, the Del Rosario redevelopment plan remained the stronger financial option. He could feel Adrian expecting logic. He could feel the vendors expecting betrayal. He could feel Clara expecting nothing, which somehow weighed the most. Gabriel cleared his throat. On paper, he said, the redevelopment plan is stronger for investors. A few heads dropped. He went on before fear could grab him by the mouth again. But markets like San Isidro don't live on paper. The room stilled. I helped prepare projections for Del Rosario. The numbers aren't false. They're incomplete. They count car access, lease turnover, retail yield. They don't count what happens when vendors who survived here for 30 years lose affordable space. They don't count the informal credit systems that keep families eating between bad weeks. They don't count the elderly customers who buy 1 onion, 2 tomatoes, and a quarter kilo of rice, because supermarkets are designed for people with enough money not to need precision. No one interrupted, not even Adrian. Gabriel's voice tightened. And if you want to talk about who should be trusted with this market, then say it honestly. Say you don't trust Clara because she came from a stall instead of a boardroom. Because of experience is a question. She has more of the kind this building actually needs than anyone I know. He stopped, breath caught. Then he did the harder thing. He looked toward the crowd and said, "A few weeks ago, I stood in public and acted like being from this market was something shameful. I said something unforgivable to a woman who deserved better from me. I'm not asking anyone to forget that. I'm saying the worst thing I've done in this room was believe that dignity belongs more easily to people with money." The hall stayed silent for a heartbeat too long. Then an old woman from a vegetables section clapped once. Another joined. Then another. Clara did not clap. But when Gabriel stepped away from the front table, she looked at him with something new in her face. Not love. Not yet. Not even pardon. Recognition, maybe. As if she were seeing the shape of the man, he might have been if fear had not trained him so well. The council deferred the final vote for 48 hours. Long enough for more anxiety, more rumors, more coffee, more prayers. Then, by a narrow margin, San Isidro Market received protected local trade status and provisional approval for the cooperative rehabilitation plan. The market did not erupt. It exhaled. Some people cried. Some argued immediately about what should be repaired first. Life resumed fast. Because relief in poor places rarely gets a full day off. Months passed. The roof over the herb section stopped leaking. Drainage improved by the meat stalls. A shared cold storage room was installed with 3 grants and too many favors. Clara created a rotating emergency fund and angered half the market by enforcing actual records for it. The child care corner opened in a painted side room where toddlers learned to count with bottle caps while their mothers sold vegetables outside. Mr. Jacinto's old office was repainted, though Clara kept his dented filing cabinet exactly where it had always been. Gabriel kept his stall. Then, little by little, he took fewer hours there and more in operations, because Clara needed someone who understood both the books and the moods of suppliers. She offered him the position formally, on a 1-year contract with clear pay, measurable responsibilities, and no personal ambiguity hidden inside it. He signed. He did not thank her with grand words. He simply showed up early. Trust returned the way dawn does in the rainy season. Not dramatically, not all at once, but by degrees you only notice if you have known a long dark. They were careful with each other, more careful than before, which was good. Love without caution had already done enough damage. One evening, nearly a year after Founders Week, Clara found Gabriel fixing the lock on the storage room behind the dry goods section, the same room where they had once argued, kissed, and lied by omission. "You're using the wrong screws," she said from the doorway. He glanced back. "Then come save me from myself." She stepped in, took the screwdriver from him, and replaced the screws without comment. He watched her hands. "You still do that thing." "What thing?" "Pretend you're annoyed when you're helping." She didn't look up. "And you still joke when you're nervous." "Are you making me nervous?" Clara finally met his eyes. A year earlier, she would have answered too quickly. A year earlier, he would have leaned on charm, and both of them would have mistaken familiarity for safety. Now she said, "Maybe a little." He nodded as if that was fair. After a moment, he reached into his pocket and held out a small brass key. Worn, scratched, familiar. She frowned. "What's that?" "The old key to my mother's freezer room," he said. "You kept it after..." "Before I found the spare." Clara stared at it. He smiled, but only a little. "I'm not asking you to take me back, because I made one decent speech and learned how to file maintenance reports. I know better than that." "Good." "I just thought," he said, looking strangely young for a second, "if we ever start again, it shouldn't be with the same key." Clara took the brass key from his palm and turned it over in her fingers. Outside, the market was closing. Metal shutters rattled. Someone laughed near the noodle stall. A child called for his mother. Life, ordinary and noisy, kept moving as if no human heart had ever believed itself the center of the world. She slipped the old key into his shirt pocket. "Then don't give me old keys," she said. For one terrible second, he looked disappointed. Then she set a new key on the table between them, the newly cut one for the office-side entrance, the one used only by management and those she trusted with opening the market before dawn. Gabriel stared at it. Clara's voice was quiet. "Be here at 4:30 tomorrow. We need to review the new vendor applications before the rush." It was not a kiss. It was not a confession. It was better, because this time what she offered him was not fantasy. It was a door. Years later, people in San Isidro still told the story wrong. They told it like revenge, because revenge is easy to understand. They said the market girl came back as owner and made the man who rejected her regret everything. That part was true, but only in the shallowest sense. The real story was harder and worth more. A woman was humiliated and did not let humiliation become her identity. A man mistook shame for ambition and learned, painfully, that love cannot survive where dignity is rationed. A market everyone called outdated survived because the people inside it were finally seen as more valuable than the land beneath them. And every morning, before the first customers arrived, Clara unlocked the office while the sky was still blue-black, and some mornings Gabriel was already there with coffee growing cold beside the ledger, waiting in the half-light like a man who had finally learned that the place he wanted to escape was also the place he needed to deserve. Would you have given him that new key?